the story with an unknown author. In this video, I'm going to tell you a mysterious story that has reached us from centuries ago, whose author remains unknown. The story consists of two parts. In the first part, you'll hear how this legendary story came to light, and in the second part, the story itself. There are lessons to be drawn from the story. You can find them in the video description. But first, immerse yourself in the story. You can return to these notes afterward. Enjoy. Part 1. The Discovery. I was sitting alone in the cafe, reaching for sugar to put in my coffee, when a terrible storm was raging outside. Snow and sleet were falling in whirlpools, and the wind was howling. With each opening of the door, an unwanted wave of air penetrated to the farthest corner of the room. Yet I was comfortable. The storm, snow, sleet, and wind meant nothing more to me than an abstract feeling of gratitude, knowing I was somewhere they couldn't affect me. As I daydreamed and sipped my coffee, the door opened and closed, and Stuart came in. Stuart was an undeniable failure. On top of that, he was a painter with above-average talent, but he had fallen into the vicious cycle that those who can't accomplish anything fall into. He was destitute. He was bankrupt. When I raised my eyes to him, the change in his appearance surprised me a bit. Actually, he wasn't dressed differently. He was wearing the same worn-out coat he always wore, and the old brown hat was the same. Yet there was something new and strange about his appearance. There was a new energy, a new life in his gestures as he shook his hat to rid it of the snow that had accumulated on his shoulders. I don't remember exactly when I invited Stuart to eat with me. Maybe I never did, but subconsciously I signaled to him. He nodded in response and immediately sat across from me. I asked him what he would eat. After carelessly examining the price list, he calmly placed his order and invited me to join him for coffee. With foolish curiosity, I watched him. Although I knew I didn't have enough money to pay the bill, I was prepared to pay since I had made the invitation. Meanwhile, I noticed with increasing wonder the sparkle in his usually lifeless eyes and the healthy, hopeful glow on his cheeks. "Did you lose a rich uncle?" I asked. "No," he replied calmly. "But I finally found my mascot. A Dalmatian? A bulldog? A terrier?" After a long pause, Stuart stopped as he brought the coffee cup to his lips. "Courier," he said, "I know I'm surprising you. This isn't strange because I'm surprising myself too. I'm a new man, a different man, and the change happened in the last few hours." He paused, looking into my eyes. "Many times you saw me coming in here, penniless, and turned the other way to pretend you didn't see me. I knew why you did it. Not because you didn't want to pay for a meal, but because you didn't have the money to do so. Can I take the bill for dinner tonight? I don't have any money on me, but this is my treat." He called the waiter and, with a quiet smile, signed both bills and sent them away, saying, "Put these on my account. A moment ago I was watching you," he said, fixing his eyes on mine. "This morning I was a hopeless, aimless piece of trash in the big city's garbage heap. Tonight, I wouldn't trade places with a millionaire. It sounds absurd, but it's true. The millionaire has spent his enthusiasm. Mine is still intact." "You're surprising me," I said curiously. "Won't you tell me the story? I'd like to hear it." "Absolutely. I intend to tell it to the whole world. It's truly interesting that it was written and printed so long ago, and not a single person has appreciated it until now. This morning I was starving. I had no credit and nowhere to eat. I was seriously considering suicide. I had gone to 3 newspapers I'd worked for before. They had all returned everything I'd given them. I had to quickly decide between dying by suicide and dying slowly of starvation. Then I found the story. I read it. You can't even imagine the change. Everything changed in an instant. And here's the result. "But what is the story?" I asked excitedly. "Wait, let me finish first." I took those old drawings to other editors. They were all accepted immediately. Can a story do for others what it did for me? Could it benefit you, for example? Could it benefit me? Why not? Actually, you need to read it yourself, but I'll tell it to you. Still, I'll try to tell it as well as I can. Just then, the waiter interrupted. Someone was asking for Stuart on the phone. The painter apologetically got up from the table. 5 minutes later, I saw him disappearing into the sleet and wind. As far as regular cafe goers could remember, Stuart had never been called to the phone before. This alone was important proof of the change in his circumstances. One night on the street, I ran into an old college friend who had since become a reporter for one of the evening newspapers. About a month had passed since that memorable meeting with Stuart that I had almost forgotten. "Hello, old friend," he said. "How's the world treating you? Are you still floating?" "Yes," I replied bitterly. "I hope to get help soon. But you seem to be doing well. Tell me about it." "Actually, things are going well, and it's all very interesting when I tell it. You know Stuart, don't you? It's all thanks to him. My luck was going completely badly. I was thinking about death and such things. When I met Stuart, I was actually looking for you, hoping you could lend me enough to pay my room rent. He told me a story. Really, old friend, it was the most interesting story I've ever heard in my life. It made me a new man. Within 24 hours, I was on my feet. Since then, I don't know what trouble or problems are." These words, spoken calmly and with the demeanor of someone stating a known fact, reminded me of the conversation I'd had with Stuart in the cafe on that stormy night a month ago. "It must be an interesting story," I said disbelievingly. "Stuart mentioned it to me once. I haven't seen him since. Where's he now?" "He was doing war sketches in Cuba for $200 a week. He just returned. It's a well-known fact that the story has worked since then. There are my friends Corcoran and Phillips, for example. You don't know them. One is a real estate agent, the other is a broker's clerk. Stuart told them the story too, and they got the same results as me. And not just them. Do you know the story?" I asked. "Would you try its effect on me?" "Absolutely. I'd do it with the greatest pleasure in the world. I'd like to print it in large black letters and hang it at all the railroad bridge stations in New York. It would definitely work very well. It's as simple as ABC. Would you excuse me for a moment?" I saw Danford over there. To tell the truth, I was starving. I had 5 cents in my pocket at that moment. This was only enough for my fare from downtown to the outskirts, but not enough to fill my stomach. There was a night owl wagon nearby that I frequently visited. I approached it. Just as I was about to leave, the vendor was getting out of the wagon. "I'm broke again," I said with great sincerity. "You'll have to trust me once more. Some ham and eggs will do for now, I think." He coughed, paused for a moment, then got back into the wagon with me. To the attendant, "Mr. Courier is reliable in what he orders," he said. "He's one of my old customers. This Mr. Bryan will take good care of you and support you just as I did. Actually, I sold everything, transfer my goods and property to Bryan." He stopped and turned to me. "By the way, isn't Stuart your friend?" I nodded. I couldn't have spoken even if I wanted to. "Yes," continued the old night owl. "He came here one night about a month ago and told me the most wonderful story I've ever heard. Very recently, I got a place on 8th Avenue. I'll now run a permanent restaurant there, near 23rd Street. Come visit me." He had gotten out of the wagon, and before I could stop him, the sliding door closed with a clatter. I ate my ham and eggs in silence. I decided to hear this story before going to sleep. Actually, I had started to see the story as a superstition. If it had opened so much fortune, it must be able to open mine too. I was convinced with all my being that this wonderful story, which I had begun to see as magic, as sorcery, was floating in the air. As I walked home, playing with a single metal coin in my pocket, I felt as if fate was walking behind me, but still couldn't catch up, as if something was secretly following me. The story had taken hold of me. When I arrived at Greek Square, I looked for Stuart's address in my address book. It wasn't recorded. Then I remembered the cafe at University Square. Even though it was late, I thought he might be there. He was there. I saw him in a far corner of the room with a group of acquaintances around him. At the same moment, he noticed me too and asked me to join the table. But there was no chance for the story. There were half a dozen people around the table, and I was the farthest from Stuart. Still, I fixed my eyes on him. I patiently waited for the right moment, determined to leave with him when he got up to go. When I took my seat, a respectful, awe-filled silence fell over the group. Everyone seemed to be thinking, and everyone's attention was on Stuart. The reason became clear. He was telling the story. I had come to the cafe too late to hear the story. When I sat down, there was a doctor to my right, a lawyer to my left. On the other side of the table across from me was an old man I knew slightly. The others were painters and journalists. "Too bad," said the doctor. "You should have come a little earlier. Stuart was telling us a story, really wonderful." "Stuart, wouldn't you retell the story for Mr. Courier?" Of course, I think, although he was actually the first person I mentioned the story to, somehow he couldn't hear the story. It was also in this cafe, at this very table. Do you remember how stormy that night was, courier? I was called to the phone or something like that, wasn't I? Of course, I remember now. They interrupted just as I was starting the story. After that, I told the story to 3 or 4 people, and the story strengthened them just like it did me. It seems incredible that just a story could have such a powerful tonic effect on the success of people with such different jobs, but it does. Like a cough syrup that's guaranteed to cure everything from a cold to rapidly progressing tuberculosis, a kind of medicine that never fails. For example, there was Parsons. You know, he's a broker himself. He'd been on the wrong side of the market for a month. He'd completely lost his grip, was on the brink of failure. I met him when he was feeling his worst. Before we parted, something brought me to the subject of the story, and I told it to him. As far as I know, it had the same effect on him as it had on everyone who heard the story. I think you'll agree with me that it's not the story itself that performs surgery on the minds of those who know the story, but the way it's told, the state of the writing. The writer created an inexplicable psychological effect. The reader is hypnotized, filled with mental and moral power. Perhaps, Doctor, you can give us a scientific explanation of the effect the story has? Isn't it a kind of elixir produced from these words? From this point, the group began a general discussion of theories. Occasionally, there were small references to the story, which were enough to frustrate me, the only person there who hadn't heard the story. Finally, I got up from my chair, walked around the table, grabbed Stuart by the arm, and managed to pull him away from the group. If you're thinking even a little bit about an old friend who's going crazy over the existence of this damn story that fate seems to have decided I'll never hear, you're going to tell it to me now? I said savagely. Stuart looked at me with great astonishment. Okay, he said. The others will give me a few minutes, I suppose. Sit here, and I'll tell it to you too. I found it pasted in an old album I bought 3 blocks from Main Street. First of all, I have no information about which publication it appeared in or who wrote it. When I discovered it, I started reading it carelessly, and it suddenly caught my attention. I had read it so many times that I could repeat it almost word for word before I put it down. It affected me strangely, as if I had come into contact with a powerful personality. There seemed to be a personal element in the story that applied to everyone who read it. After reading it many times, I started thinking about it. I couldn't stay at home, so I put on my coat and hat and went outside. I must have walked several miles in joy without realizing I was the same man who had been in deep despair just a short time before. I met you here that day, remember? Just then, a messenger in uniform delivering telegrams interrupted. The message was from the chief and asked Stuart to come to the office immediately. The dispatch was already an hour late. There was nothing to do. He had to go at once. Too bad, he said, getting up and extending his hand. I'll tell you what to do, old friend. I don't think it will take more than an hour or 2. Take my key and wait for me in my room. On the desk by the window, you'll find an old album bound in rawhide. I'm sure this binding was made by the author of the magical story. Wait for me in my room until I return. It wasn't difficult to find the notebook. It was a strange, homemade thing, covered in rawhide and bound with leather strips. The pages formed a strange composition of yellow paper and homemade parchment. I found a story oddly printed on the last written material. It was strange and peculiar. It was obvious that the printer had prepared it under the supervision of the writer. The style of expression was an unusual combination of 17th and 18th century styles. The addition of italics and bold letters to the text could only have come from the author's brain. And here is that magical story with an unknown author. Part 2, the story. Having extracted from my experiences the great secret of all worldly affairs. Since my days are now numbered, I think it would be wise to give future generations the opportunity to benefit from the knowledge I possess. I do not apologize for my style of expression or lack of literary merit. I know that the latter is its own apology. Heavier tools than the pen have always fallen to my lot. Moreover, the weight of years has somehow paralyzed my hand and brain. Yet I can tell you the truth that I see as the inside of a walnut. What does it matter how the shell is cracked to obtain and make useful the inside? I have no doubt that in telling it, I will use expressions that have remained in my memory since childhood. Because when people reach my age, events in their youth become clearer in their perception than those of recent times. Moreover, if it has integrity, is harmonious, and is understood, it doesn't really matter how a thought is expressed. I thought long about how best to explain this recipe for success I discovered. I thought it would be appropriate to give it as it is. That is, if I tell my life story in some way, the instructions on how to gather the materials and how to add the spices for the meal to be successful will be clearly understood. These things can happen. Generations after I've turned to dust, people who will be grateful to me for what I've written may come into the world. In those times, my father, a sailor who had settled on a farm in the Virginia colony, where I was born, more than 100 years ago, in 1642, a few years after abandoning his education in his early life. It would have been better for my father if he had listened to my mother's wise advice to continue his education. But he did not, and the good ship of which he was captain was exchanged for the land I mentioned. When I reached the age of 10, my mother departed this world. 2 years later, my dear father followed her. Their only child, was left alone. However, they had 2 friends who looked after me for a while. They opened a home for me under their roof. I benefited from this for 5 months. Nothing was left to me from my father's estate. But in later years, when my mind came to me, I was sure that the friend under whose roof I sheltered for a while had eaten my father's, and therefore my right. I will not say anything here about the time from my age of 12 and a half to 23, because that period has nothing to do with this story. But after a while, with 10 of the 16 guineas I had saved for my work, I boarded a ship going to Boston. There I started working first as a cooper, then as a ship's carpenter, although the sea was never among my ambitions, always after the ship docked at the wharf. Fortune sometimes deliberately smiles on someone whose temperament has completely gone astray. This is what happened to me. I became wealthy. By the time I reached 27, less than 4 years, I was the owner of the workshop where I had worked as a tenant. However, Fortune is a fickle woman who must be held by force. If you don't watch over her, she escapes. At this time, disaster, which is one of the harbingers of weak souls and lost intention, paid me a visit. Fire destroyed my workshop and left me on darkened roads with debts I couldn't pay a single penny of. I worked with acquaintances seeking help for a new beginning, but it seemed that the fire that had burned my hearth had also consumed their sympathy. Thus, in a short time, I not only lost everything, but also became unexpectedly indebted to others. For this reason, I was thrown into prison. Apart from this last, unseemly act that would make me completely hopeless and dispirited, I could have recovered from my losses. I stayed in prison for a year. When I finally got out, I was no longer the man who had entered hopeful, content with what he had, trusting in the world and people. There are many roads in life, and the vast majority of them go downward. Some of them are very steep, some less so. But ultimately, no matter at what angle they are inclined, they all arrive at the same place: failure. When I got out of prison, I didn't have 5 shillings. I had nothing in the world except the poor clothes on me and a cane that the guard allowed me to keep because it was worthless. Yet as a skilled worker, I quickly found work with good wages. But as someone who had tasted the fruit of worldly bounty, I could not be satisfied. I became sullen and melancholic. For this reason, I spent my evenings at the tavern to cheer up and forget my losses. Not because I drank too much, except for occasional drinking, because I've always been a bit stingy, but to laugh and have fun with friends who couldn't accomplish anything, sing songs, and joke. When I had a bit too much in those times, I enjoyed telling the story of my disaster and cursing those who I thought had wronged me by not rushing to my aid. Moreover, I took childish pleasure in stealing a few minutes each day from the time my employer paid me. Such behavior is even less honest than open theft. This habit continued and increased until one day I found myself not only unemployed, but also characterless, meaning I could no longer hope for any other employer in Boston to hire me. That's when I saw myself as a mistake. I can compare my situation then to that of a man whose foot slips while descending the right side of a mountain. The more he slides, the faster he goes down. I heard that this condition is also explained by the word Ishmael. As far as I understand, this means a man who is against everyone and thinks everyone is against him. I won't go into detail about the slow depletion of my energy. It is not appropriate to dwell too much on misfortunes, which is a saying worth remembering. It will be enough to add that one day came when I had no money to buy food and clothing. I became dependent on charity except for a few pennies or occasionally a shilling I earned, though not often. I couldn't work steadily. Thus my body became skin and bones, and my soul only a skeleton. I was pitiful in those times. I had reached a dying state. More could be said for my mind than for my body. In my imagination, I consider myself isolated from the whole world, because I had truly sunk very deep. I remember my awakening well, because it happened when I really woke up at night. My bed was a pile of sawdust behind the carpentry shop where I once worked as a tenant. My roof was a pyramid of old barrels I had placed underneath. The night was cold, and I was shivering. Yet contrary to this, in my dream, I was seeing a world full of light and warmth, the abundance of good things. When I tell you about the effect of my dream, you'll think my mind was affected. It is the hope that others' mind will be similarly affected that encourages me to write these things. It is this dream that leads me to the belief, no, the knowledge that I possess two selves. It was my own good self that provided me with the help I vainly sought from my acquaintances. I heard that this condition is explained by the word double. Yet this word doesn't cover my meaning. A double can be nothing more than a duality, neither half of which can be possessed independently. But I won't philosophize, because philosophy is nothing more than a suit for adorning a lifeless body. Moreover, it wasn't the dream itself that affected me. It was the impression it created and the effect it had on me that gave me my freedom. Then I saw my other self. In my dream, after forcing my way through a storm of snow and wind, I carefully looked through a window. There I saw my other self. He was glowing with health. The fire of logs in the fireplace before him was blazing. There was a conscious strength and power in his manner. He was strong both physically and mentally. I timidly knocked lightly on the door, and he invited me in. As he indicated that I should sit in a chair by the fire, there was a calm, mocking smile in his eyes, not unkind, but without any mixture of pity or consolation. But he didn't say a single word like welcome. When I warmed up, filled with the shame and discomfort that the contrast between us placed upon me, I went back out into the storm. Just then I woke up. This is where the strange part of the story begins. Because when I woke up, I was not alone. A being, which I later realized was abstract to others, but real to me, was with me. The being resembled me, yet was strikingly different. Its eyebrows, no higher than mine, appeared rounder and fuller. Its clear, straight, purposeful eyes sparkled with enthusiasm and determination. Its lips, chin, all the contours of its face and body structure were dominant and resolute. Calm, unwavering, self-confident. I was silent, seized by a magical tremor, and afraid even of intangible shadows. When the being turned and left, I followed it. Throughout the day, I never lost sight of it, except when it entered some doors I dared not enter and disappeared. In such places, as I couldn't help but be amazed at the being's courage and daring to enter places my own feet were afraid to tread. Being so like me yet so different, I waited for its return with anxiety and worry. Moreover, as if purposely, I was being directed to the places and people whose presence I feared most, offices where I had once worked, people with whom I had had financial dealings. Throughout the day, I followed the being. In the evening, I saw it disappear behind the doors of a hotel famous for its joy and good living. I sought out the pyramid of barrels and the sawdust. The good self, that's what I call it. We met again that night in my dream. When its voice woke me from sleep, it was again beside me. On its face was that calm, mocking smile that could not be mixed with pity or consolation in any way. Its condescension hurt me deeply. The second day was no different from the first. It was a repetition of it. But again, I was condemned to wait outside during the being's visits to places where I would want to go if I had the necessary courage. What separates a person's soul from their body and puts them in a degrading position is fear. Many times I tried to express this, but the words turned into unintelligible sounds in my throat. That day ended like the previous one. This situation continued for successive days until I stopped counting them. Yeah, I discovered that being in constant contact with the being would have an effect on me. One night, when I woke up among the barrels and saw it there, I found the courage to speak, albeit with obvious reluctance. "Who are you?" I dared to ask. I was even startled by the straightforward emergence of my own voice. This question seemed to please my companion, so much so that when he answered me, I noticed his smile was less mocking. "I am I," he replied. "I am who you used to be. I am who you can be again. Why do you hesitate? I am who you are, and the person you threw away for your other companion. I am the person made in God's image who once possessed your body. We once lived together, not in harmony because this can never be, nor in unity because this is impossible, but like joint tenants who rarely fight for complete possession. Back then you were a frail thing, but you became selfish and exhausting until I was no longer with you. For this reason, I left you. Within every human being born into the world, there is a positive self and a negative self. Whichever of these is supported by the body becomes dominant. Then the other is driven to leave its dwelling place temporarily and forever. I am your positive self. You are the negative self. I possess everything. You possess nothing. The body in which we both lived belongs to me, but it is not clean. Therefore, I can no longer live in it. Only if it is cleansed can I possess it. The next question I asked the being was, "Why are you following me?" "You followed me, not I you. You can exist without me for a while longer, but the path you're walking goes downward, and its end is death. Now that you realize you've come to the end, you're considering whether it would be wise to clean your house and invite me in. Move away from the current thoughts and will in your brain. Purge them from your being. Only then can I bring them back under my control. My brain has already lost its power." I hesitated. Will is now a weak thing. Can you repair them? "Listen," said the being. As I cringed pitifully on the ground beneath his feet, he rose above me. For a person's positive self, everything is possible. The world belongs to him. It is his property. He fears nothing. He is horrified by nothing. He stops for nothing. He doesn't ask for privileges. He demands them. He is dominant. He doesn't bend. His desires are commands. When he approaches, resistance flees. He levels mountains, fills valleys, and travels on a smooth terrain where stumbling is unknown. After that, I slept again. When I woke up, it was as if I was in another world. The sun was shining, and I was aware of birds chirping above my head. The body that had been trembling and hesitant yesterday was strong and full of energy. I looked at the pyramid of barrels in wonder, having used this as a refuge for so long. I became wonderfully aware that I had spent my last night under its protection. I remembered the events of the night and looked around me for the being. It was not visible, but soon I noticed something crouched in a distant corner of my resting place. Something distorted in appearance, misshapen, disheveled in look, frail, trembling pitifully. It was staggering as it walked and approaching me pitifully. But I laughed loudly, mercilessly. Then I understood that it was the negative self, and although I hadn't realized it until that moment, the positive self was inside me. Moreover, I was hurrying to get away. I had no time for philosophy. I had a lot to do. A lot. It was strange that I hadn't thought of this yesterday. But yesterday was past. Today was now with me and had just begun. As was once my daily habit, my steps headed toward the tavern where I used to eat my meals. When I entered, I greeted cheerfully and smiled at the responses to my greeting. People who had been ignoring me for months were politely greeting me as they passed by on the road. I went to the washroom, and from there to the breakfast table. Then when I went to the bar, I paused for a moment and said the following to the hotel owner. "If it's available, I'll stay in the room I used before. If not, I'll manage in another room until I can move there." Then I went outside and hurried toward the cooperage. There was a large cart in the yard, and men were loading barrels onto it for shipping. Without asking any questions, I started grabbing barrels and throwing them to the men working at the top of the load. After finishing, I entered the shop. There was an empty workbench. I could tell from the clutter on it that it wasn't being used. It was the same one I had once worked at. I took off my coat and quickly cleaned off what was on it. A minute later, my feet were on the vice arm, working to plane barrel boards. An hour later, the foreman entered the room and stopped in amazement when he saw me. Since I had once been an excellent worker, a pile of properly planed barrels already stood beside me. There was no one better than me, but unfortunately, old age had deprived me of some of this skill. I answered his unasked question with a short but detailed sentence. "I've returned to work, sir." He nodded and passed by, looking at the other men's work. Before long, he looked at me with questioning eyes. From that moment on, I was a successful man. Before long, I had a new shipyard and began to enjoy all of worldly bounties again. Warnings. I beg everyone reading these to pay attention to the following warnings, because the word success and everything it expresses depends on these. 1. Everything you greatly desire is yours. All you have to do is reach out and take it. 2. Being aware of the dominant force within you means possessing everything that can be obtained. 3. Never, under any circumstances, have fear, because fear is an extension that feeds the negative self. 4. If you have skill, use it. The world must benefit from it, and therefore so must you. 5. Be with your positive self day and night. If you listen to its advice, you won't go wrong. 6. Remember that philosophy is a thesis. The world that is your property is reality itself. So do what comes from within you. 7. Don't pay attention to things that will divert you from your path. Don't ask anyone's permission to do something and succeed. 8. The negative self only asks you to do good. The positive self does these things itself. 9. Fortune awaits you at every step you take. Catch it, grasp it, and hold it tight. Because it is yours, it belongs to you. Keeping these warnings in mind, take action now. Reach out and seize the positivity you may have never used, except in great emergencies. Remember, life is the gravest emergency. Your positive self is right beside you. Cleanse yourself and strengthen your will. It will immediately seize control. It is waiting for you. Today is the time to take action. Start this new journey right now. Always be alert. Whichever self controls you, the other is always waiting beside you. Be careful against evil entering within you. My duty ends here. I have written you the recipe for success. If followed, this recipe absolutely cannot fail. I now place upon my own good self, future generations, and you the responsibility of carrying the secret of this all-pervading goodness, the secret of being what exists within you.